Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Eclipse IDE Working Group community session, where it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to show what we've been up to and what's going on, and try and get more of you guys involved. So I've already shared the agenda, but this is the agenda that we'll go through today, but I'll just start with the introduction. So April 2021, the Eclipse Foundation started the Eclipse IDE Working Group. We're focusing on the Eclipse IDE and this SimRail. Our group's focus is to continue to ensure we continue to sustain and evolve and expand adoption of the Eclipse IDE and RCP suite of products and the technologies that go with those things. Our effort is also the longer term goal is to grow and evolve the ecosystem, the Eclipse ecosystem, to develop the platform to improve the end user experience and value for people using the platform. As everybody here knows, I'm sure, the Eclipse IDE has a huge market share still. So it's a mature product, but still really widely used. So our intention is to keep that share and expand it with various different initiatives. We have a new web page for the Eclipse IDE Work Group. This is going to be hopefully become the home of all Eclipse IDE kind of stuff, but we can group it all together. It'll be easy to find. And so this is our mission here, so that you'll see continual improvements here. These are the members, strategic supporter and sponsors of the Eclipse IDE Working Group. Thanks to all those companies for their great contribution. I won't go into who they are one by one, but we're always looking for more members and more support, because we could achieve a lot more, but more on that later. So our working group anniversary, so just over 1 year old. So this is for one reason why I'm chairing this and not Pradeep. So thank you for Pradeep for the past year chairing this group. We've made a good start. This year we obviously celebrated 20 years of the Eclipse IDE. Is a big milestone for our community. We also made some other great steps. So Ed, who's on the call, thanks Ed, joined us as a SimRail architect and release engineer. This was a key requirement, the first requirement really raised by the working group that was solved. And we've a very good relationship with the Planning Council. So the collaboration between this group and the Planning Council has been effective. Top issues were identified by the Planning Council, and there are plans to address them from this group. So this is there was some questions about how this relationship would work, but we have a good relationship now. So the Planning Council was tasked by the steering committee to identify the top issues affecting the successful release of each Eclipse release, train and for SimRail, both as a platform and product. These are some of the things which were found to be a concern. So for example, the bus factor, projects which have a key relevance to Eclipse platform that don't have a lot of contribution, maybe one individual or less. And then identifying the projects that were projects which were affected by such a risk, which downstream projects were affected. And then the other big thing is the updating the graphical layer of Eclipse, where it's lagging behind the OS, where things have changed, for example, dark mode support or web browser integration, for example, things where the Eclipse platform has lagged behind a little bit. So these are big items that could make a big difference to end users. So the steering committee took these Planning Council items and translated them into action points, how to achieve these things. These have been carried out, and we've actually allocated most of the IDE Working Group's budget to improve these common things. So some of the highlights, I already mentioned Ed, SimRail release engineer. We've got some other things which I think today will be discussed, for example, dependency graphs. And a very important point, the Eclipse Foundation created guidelines for us to fund work with external contractors or companies and so on. So some of this work has already been put out for quotations, and some actually is now already underway and being fixed as part of this program. And this is great news for the future, to have such a a framework in place. In fact, that's really big news for us. So progress is good, of course, but so much more can be done. We have a great big long list of items for improvement, many more than we can fund and do today just within the working group. So of course, we're to achieve our objectives about where we want this to go in the future. We'd like to encourage more people, more companies to join or sponsor the working group. The more people that contribute, the more we can achieve and the more we can reach our goals. So if you're interested in joining us and supporting the development, you're welcome to join our working group meetings. They happen every 2 weeks on Tuesday at that time. We'll also be, and we're also planning an event at the EclipseCon Community Day, which is back face-to-face in Ludwigsburg, back to normal. Very much looking forward to that. So I hope you can all be there. That would be great. That's all from me. So without further ado, I will give the screen to Ed, who's going to talk to us about PGP changes, I think, first.
Yeah. So let's see how the screen sharing goes.
I'm stopping.
Okie doke. Share screen. Share. Yay, successful. Okay, so I prepared some slides around the PGP stuff, but mostly I wanted to give a quick demo, show what some of the dialogues and stuff look like. So the slides are here mostly for your reference. So you can see there's an issue that was used to track all of the work. It's got links to various Bugzillas. It's got some background if you want to learn more about how PGP works. It also shows how you can, if you're sort of a product builder, how you can build your product so that you don't get prompted by the dialogue that I'll show you. Mike also blogged about this topic, so that was an interesting read. But the basic idea behind PGP signing is it's designed to augment the existing jar signing technology. And the drawback that was seen was that with jar signing, when you consume some jar that's provided by Maven, you have to modify it in order to sign it, and then you essentially end up with a different artifact than the original one. So with PGP signatures, they're external to the artifact, and they've been used by Maven for a long time in their repository. So all the jars that are in a Maven repository have an associated external PGP signature. So it's a widely used technology. And the thinking was that this will help us streamline the new direct from Maven consumption. So with the M2E project now, it's possible to define a target platform where you consume jars directly from Maven. And with this approach, we can PGP sign those so that they're still trackable as which project consumed them and redistributed them. So during the 2022-03 release cycle, we built on the work that Michael Istria started and essentially made it industrial strength and made sure that it worked at all the different stages of the build cycle. And in the current release cycle, there are now 40 PGP signed artifacts on the release train, so it is being significantly used. So I'll quickly show what the dialogue looks like, and I should preface this that we hope that you don't see this dialogue. So we've gone through a lot of steps to make sure that this dialogue is not likely to come up. But what I've done here is I've done a mock-up where all the certificates being used are treated as unrooted, as unrecognized by the Java C-certs. All the PGP keys are treated as never having been recognized and approved before. And I even have some unsigned content. So this dialogue came up as part of using the installer at the end of it downloading all the artifacts. If there are any unrooted certificates or any PGP keys or unsigned content, then this dialogue will come up. And this dialogue is a major improvement over the two separate dialogues that used to come up for unsigned content and for the certificates, because now we can track which artifacts are associated with which keys. So I'm going to maximize this. And so part of the behavior of this dialog is if I select something, it will select all the artifacts associated with that certificate. So an interesting one is the JCE certificate. There's a special certificate that's used for signing jars that involve cryptography. So that's these two in particular. And this selection process works both ways. So if I select an artifact, it shows me that in fact, this artifact is signed by two different certificates. And I can see what those certificates are. And same with for this artifact. For the PGP keys, so for the certificates, we see these chains that go back to a root certificate. And normally that root certificate is in the Java installation CCERT, and therefore this dialog wouldn't come up for those. For the PGP keys, there's a similar chain of trust that we can see here. So this is the TM for E project's key, it's subkey of that project's key. And that PGP key has also been signed by the webmaster's PGP key. And we see that information here. And for unsigned content, I'm actually did an install from a locally built Tyco build of OOMP. So that's why all of OOMP's artifacts are not signed in this installation. So some of the things you can do in the dialog is you can say, I want to always trust everything, I don't care. And then this warning comes up saying, are you really sure? Because now you're going to install everything and you will never be prompted again. But I offered that as an option for people who just don't want to see this dialog and don't care. There's also the remember selected signers. So if I select all of these certificates and say, remember the signers and trust selected, then the installation can proceed and the installation will launch. But what I want to show you as well is the trust preferences dialog. So here, all those certificates that I just saw are remembered. And so even certificates that aren't rooted in your CCERTs, they'll be remembered in your preferences and you won't be prompted for them again if you told the dialog you wanted it to remember. So that's the basic idea. We hope people don't see this dialog. And I've, in the OOMP catalog generator, I actually look through all the repositories and collect up all these keys, and they're automatically added to the preferences on startup of any installation. So generally, we don't expect to see that much of this dialog and people needing to fuss with this. But for security purposes, of course, this is a sound technology that the user's aware of where things are coming from, how it's being installed. One quick thing I want to show you as well is in this Eclipse installation, there's an example, there's an extension point that the platform provides, and you can keep a key, put a key in a project, and in the plugin.xml, you can specify the extension point to point at that particular key. And so you can sort of pre-trust specific keys. You have to remember to put it in your build.properties so it's there at runtime as well. So here, for example, but for those of you who are building products on top of the release train and on top of the platform, you might want to do something like this too. And this IDE that I'm showing here is one that's set up automatically by an OOMP setup. It's got all of the repos that go into the platform SDK. So this is a pretty valuable resource to be able to find how does the platform do all of the things currently. So I'll leave it at that. And then when we get to the question and answers later at the end of the session, then we can ask follow-up questions if you wish. I don't know, is the next session the contribution stuff, or is the Simrel thing next?
It's the, we're going to give you a little break, Ed, and come back to you later.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so next up, thank you, Ed, that's great. Next up is the, this is a long title, so bear with me. Migration of Eclipse platform to GitHub and changes to contribution workflows. That's Mikhail, Alexander, and Sravan. I see Sravan, you're ready.
Yes.
over to you.
Let me share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Shravan. I have with me Alexander along with me. Michael could not join today. In this talk, I'm going to talk why we had to migrate to GitHub and how we did that and what are the impacts it has caused on workflows. We had to come up with new workflows and also what kind of impact it has caused on community on as a whole. Okay, now why to migrate? From the foundation side, we have foundation supports 3 source code services, source code hosting services. One is the Git based Git repositories. Second one is GitLab. Third one is GitHub. GitHub is the public one, and GitLab is a newly hosted service. Git based Git services use Bugzilla as a bug tracking system. With Bugzilla being going out of support, Foundation wants to reduce some of the services there. So Foundation announced its desire to reduce deprecate Git services in around August 2020, and they announced a concrete plan in Jan 2021. From then onwards, we started work on this particular migration effort, and we had a couple of options whether we can go to GitLab or go to GitHub. With most of the new developers coming out of colleges and also most open source projects being on GitHub, we thought GitHub is the best approach for us, and that's how we started migrating to GitHub. Okay, and now how to migrate? If you look at platform source code tree, platform source code tree consists of one aggregator repository. There are 23 source repositories connected to aggregator in the form of submodules. And we have some documentation repositories, but we haven't migrated them all yet. I will come back to that. Now, the very first thing which we did is we started with the aggregator repository. Here, Michael actually helped us a lot, and he did a lot of experimentation doing the migration effort and came up with a plan. Aggregator repository is the smallest one, and yet that's the most complex repository we had. So that's the one we tackled first. And once that migration is complete, we have a proper document on how to migrate other source code repositories. So with the help of project leads, we completed all the migrations by end of 424 M1 timeframe. By that time, we have migrated all the repositories. So what kind of impacts it has caused? The first impact is with GitHub, we cannot use the Gerrit patch approach anymore now because Gerrit, we moved away from Gerrit. We have to do with the pull requests. So there is a change in the workflow here. So any contributor who wants to contribute to a platform, they need to fork existing repository into a private fork and then do the work in a separate branch and create a PR, create a pull request to contribute to platform project. And this is the approach we have migrated to. This is a somewhat different than existing one. There are some pushbacks on this, but yes, we are able to convince all the contributors to go ahead with this approach. And with GitHub bug issues, we can track all the changes, features and changes We can track either with issues and pull requests. Earlier, we used to have we used to have a one-on-one link with Bugzilla, Bugzilla bug as well as code change. Now that is not required anymore now, because we can track code changes as well as issues from the same repository. So that is also one change we have enforced now. Now, again, it is much more easier to track on GitHub now. Earlier, we used to create bugs and add dependencies to a umbrella bug. Now, you can just create a umbrella bug with checklist. If a bug already exists, you can add that. Otherwise, add the checklist and convert to the bug when you are starting the work. That kind of simplicity is available now. So that is how those are some of the impacts on the workflows. The kind of impacts on the community side, we have an overall positive impact on the community side. There are many people who are eagerly and willingly contributing to PR validation jobs, merging the PRs, and having the documentation also in sync. We have multiple contributions we received. So we had extra help, especially some of the contributions here are improvements on the PR validations. We have a validation schedule. Earlier, we were dependent on whatever services Jenkins provided. Now we are using GitHub Actions and other GitHub Actions to contribute to make the PR validations now. We still have Jenkins validations, but that is one of the validation jobs. There is validation schedule has been contributed by Hans Wellman here, and similarly, we have one more important contribution from community. This is especially from Christoph. In SWT supports multiple OS as well as multiple versions of Java. Earlier, we never managed to test on different OS and different versions of Java during PR validation. Now we can do that. With GitHub Actions, we are able to do that now. These are some of the changes, some of the positive impacts which we got. Okay, on the next steps, we still need to migrate documentation bundles. We still have a problem with documentation bundles. From the Eclipse websites are hosted from Gerrit-based repositories. Though we migrated some of the documentation bundles, we had to create synchronization jobs in our Jenkins instances to sync whatever changes done in GitHub repositories into Gerrit-based repositories. So that's why we paused that effort for now. Once publishing solution is available, we will migrate that particular part. Automation of tasks using GitHub Actions. There are some tasks like we do if you see aggregator build, there is one GitHub action for testing third-party licenses. We do have that kind of GitHub actions, and at the same time, we can expand SWT testing, which was contributed to SWT to multiple repositories. We still need to expand that. At the same time, we need to improve our processes, whatever process which we do in a developing platform. We have to keep improving them. And we still need to, we are planning to explore GitHub bots to help us in maintaining some of the tasks. Like currently we are using a one bot called Dependabot, which we use to maintain our Maven dependencies in platform. Similarly, we are trying to explore any other parts which can be used to maintain third-party dependencies, etc. These are some of the next steps which we want to do. Alex, do you want to say something, add here?
Yes, what I want to add is that last week or two, we got a very nice comment from a user who, at least I don't know the name, seen it for the first time, being asked to open a new issue in another repository just because we can't move from one organization to another on GitHub. And the answer we got was, I'm so happy to do that for the sake of getting a decent way to report and being able to read the report I do and answers I get. This more or less shows one of the biggest impacts it has on the community. It's not so welcome on many of us long-timers, just because we were so used to do things in certain way for the last 10 to 20 years. But it was also very helpful on that side, because it opened our eyes how many things we were taking for granted and never actually dare to look in the details and understand what we can improve so people that join the project would feel more welcome. And right now we see a number of changes coming to the projects, like less repositories, faster builds, and so on, that were not directly related to GitHub migration, but during the migration process and not everything set in stone yet, we saw all these weak points and we are moving to improve them. And this is probably the biggest win, the fact that even every change, not so often, but every change helps us to find out what we are missing and how to make it easier for newcomers. So don't be afraid of such changes for the future. It might look very scary at the first point. At the end, I would say we are all positively surprised how well it went.
Okay, there are things I want to show you. So any questions? Do you want to come back to the questions later?
Questions later might be good, just in case we run out of time. But I think we're okay for time.
Okay.
Questions at the end. I think that's the plan.
Okay. Okay then. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shravan. Thank you,
you,
Alexander. Thank you both. Good presentation. Thank you. Back to Ed, who's going to give us a SimRail release process overview.
Okay, let's try to share again. I think you have to stop sharing before I can share. Okay.
Yeah, stop.
Oh.
Yeah, we're pushing our luck here, Ed, aren't we?
Yeah, third time lucky, yay.
Good work.
Okay, I have a couple slides for this, but this is mostly demo as well. Again, this, I think many people know how the SimRail process works, but I thought I would make it explicit that we see. Basically what we start with is the P2 update sites from 70 projects. So lots of projects produce, features that you can install in Eclipse. And what the SimRail process tries to do is create a single aggregate repository where all the requirements of all the parts in that repository are satisfied within the repo so that the downstream users and consumers have a single repo where they know everything works together and can be installed together and has been tested together. So the basic idea is that from these 70 repositories, I'll show in a few minutes how this is specifically managed, but we create a staging repository that gathers up the results of all those repos. And then at specific milestones like M1 and RC1, we promote those things to a numbered release repository. And that then acts as input for the Eclipse packaging project. So it also has a staging repository as its descriptions of its product changes, it's continuously building them. And at the same milestone points as the SIMREL, the common train, they promote their repositories and packages into the packages repository. They also produce packaged products, so zip files and tar files, DMGs of those products. And again, they do those regularly in the staging type of approach, and those get promoted when the milestones happen. Then downstream from all of those is the OOMF, the Eclipse installers, and it uses as input the two promoted repositories, the train and the EPP, and creates equivalent product definitions for those so that the installer can install exactly the set of features defined by the product. And eventually, when all these steps are complete, the Eclipse web dev team creates a web page that provides links to all of those packages, the installers and the EPP products. So right now, this process, it's really carefully documented in the CI instance of SIMREL, and I'll show you that in a second. I also wanted to demonstrate how the different projects contribute their results into SIMREL for aggregation. And I wanted to do a quick demo of the analysis tools that I've been developing to help better manage these products and understand the dependencies between all of the different contributors to the train, but also between the installable units themselves. So in terms of documentation, a little bit bus factor, if I was to be hit by a bus, the CI instance has an outline of what I was just describing of the overall processes behind SIMREL. This main page is driven mostly around the aggregator pipeline that runs the builds, it produces the staging repository. It also runs a reporting tool on it. And as the users, the contributors update their contributions, a validation build runs to let them know whether what they've contributed creates a consistent result. And that's sort of the community aspect that the providers provide stuff that's consumed by these jobs. Then for me as the SIMREL engineer, these are the processes that I follow on each milestone. So I go and promote the releases from staging or the builds from staging to releases and schedule a bunch of things. I won't go into great detail, but the point is it's documented here, and this builds on the work that Fred Gurr started. So when I started sharing the task with him, then I improved some of these things that weren't clear to me. I made them improve the descriptions and so on. So now it's pretty easy to follow these steps and make things happen. And because so much of it's nicely automated, that it's actually made the workload a lot less and a lot more streamlined. I also want to point out that Wayne keeps a list of all of the projects that are contributing to the release train and what versions of their stuff is being contributed. And I'm trying to automate the production of this information as well, because it's a fair bit of work for Wayne to produce such a list. We also have reporting tools that are hosted by OOMF that are running constantly. So every night we do a build, and here's, for example, a build that does the analysis of the release train. We make sure that all the licenses are proper and consistent. We can see that there are currently 2 PGP keys being used for the signed content. We also look at the certificates that are being used for signing. So the complete analysis, if some unsigned content showed up or somebody's got a bad license, which will result in the user being prompted with seemingly duplicate licenses when in fact they're just a license with one tiny little difference in the middle, then we'll find out about it and can nip that in the bud. So what I wanted to do was show you some of the new analysis tools that I've been working on, and in the slides I left a link to this issue. This is for tracking the contributions of those new features. But among the improvements as well, if you look at some of the builds that are happening here, the ones in the aggregation, you can see that if we'll switch to that, you can see that this build, the aggregator build, takes 59 minutes. With some of the changes I've been making to do downloads and stuff in parallel, I've reduced that build time down to 6 or 7 minutes. So we can see some pretty big improvements happening in this area as well from the work that I've been doing on the P2 aggregator. What I'm going to show you here is essentially a development environment. This is a self-hosted launch with the latest development work that I'm doing. But this is an IDE that the contributors to SimRel use to update their contributions. So the SimRel aggregator itself is essentially a grouped list of contributions. So I'll show them, they're also shown in a flat list here. But in the end, you can see this is the list of all the update sites from which things are being contributed. And for each one of them, you can see what the content of that update site is. And this list is induced from the different contributions. So we can see Equinox contributes this particular repository to the train currently. And these are the products and features that it says should be on the train from that repo. And that's how the different projects go in. Often what the projects will do is they will just go and change just this one link here as they have new builds from milestone to milestone. They change the link, they commit this to Garrett. The Garrett verification build says, yep, everything still aggregates, and then they can commit it, push it to the master version. So on top of this support, I've built this new AgRAN model, an aggregator analyzer model. And it's essentially a decorator or a wrapper model around the aggregator itself. So at the root, there's an aggregation, which is a reference to the aggregator model. And then below that root, there are all these contributions, so-called contribution analysis instances. Some of them don't actually wrap and a contribution to SimRel. They don't wrap an agricon. I did that so that, especially for third-party stuff, that I could create something to logically represent third-party items. Because what I'm trying to do here is create a dependency graph between the projects, between these contributions. But this graph has so many links in it because of one project provides a third-party jar that another project uses, but in the end, most of these things come from Orbit, so they're not really dependencies between the projects. So that's part of the idea here. You can see, in fact, that it starts out as just a specification, analysis specification, and then if you turn to one of these tabs, it actually logically does the aggregation. So the aggregated repository is the logical result of aggregating. So we've not aggregated the artifacts, but just the logical metadata. And that information is then partitioned among the different so-called contribution analysis items. And each of these items has an installable unit, and I use that term generically because it means features and plugins and even like executables for products and so on. Each of these installable units has an ID and a version, which we see in the label. And each of them has a set of requirements as well as a set of capabilities. So a lot of times people think that plugins, bundles directly depend on each other, and that isn't actually how it's implemented in P2. There's in fact a set of capabilities. So you see all these Java package capabilities and various other capabilities, and those are how things are hooked up. So if I look at a particular required bundle, so the Excelio common bundle depends on the core runtime bundle. Via this requirement, I can see how that requirement is resolved against the capability in another installable unit. If I double click that, we get to the core runtime installable unit and see that it has a bundle capability. And so this is essentially like a two-way link. As I double click on these things, I bounce back and forth between the two things. Another view that I've built up here is this so-called duplicates view. And here I can see, all of the things where there's more than one of them. And so for this older JSON version, if I look at the newer one, I can see all the projects that depend on this one. And this view filters the capabilities down to, and the requirements that are listed down to requirements that resolve only to this capability. So often there are requirements that they have a range and they can link into a whole bunch of different capability versions, but these ones specifically resolve only to this capability in this bundle. So if I look at the JSON stuff here, I can see, well, it's only here because Papyrus requires specifically this version and doesn't tolerate a newer version. And the only way that this is going to go away is if Papyrus does something, which I've asked them to do, but they've not done yet. So another useful thing that you can do with this type analysis, remember our favorite just before Christmas log4j problem that showed up. And it's like, then we'll take security not lightly. But with a view like this, if we'd had a view like this at the time, you could immediately see that this log4j, the older version that had a problem, is used only by Passage. And you can see that right now, if we had to get a new version, Passage would have to do a new build because they include that feature or that bundle in their feature. And so their feature has a very strict range on it. The bundle dependencies themselves have just the bottom end dependencies, so would tolerate a newer version. So this view can be very useful when we have problems. We can find out why any particular bundle is on the train and who we need to contact to do something about getting a newer version on the train. I also have some views here that kind of boil down the intermediate capabilities and requirements. I'm not sure it's particularly useful, but you can see, which bundles require who, and the inverse, who's required by who. So both directions of the dependencies. One other interesting thing with these contributed IUs that we can look at the JRE IU and all of its capabilities. If we look at its EE capabilities, we can see that there are lots of things that have a BRIE of Java 11, but there's nothing that requires any higher version of Java. So nothing requires Java 17 specifically, and the next version of the release train will allow dependencies on Java 17, but we can see currently there is no such dependencies. Another view that I created just to understand if I'm partitioning things correctly is to kind of boil down the large number of IUs into a small number of namespaces, so I can see what different namespaces the different projects are contributing and get a sense, have I partitioned them correctly? Finally, this is the dependencies graph that we talked about earlier. I've refined this a lot in the last 2 weeks to provide additional information. So there's, in particular, these two numbers we see next to these. So also notice in the hover, what I've done is I've mapped the contributions to projects in the project metadata information. And if you look in the hovers, I know which projects there are, and I know what all the Git repositories of those projects are. And this number here is the last time, how many days ago that Eclipse updated their agricon, their contribution to the release train. And the second number is the most recent day, how many days ago, most recently, there was a commit in any of the Git repositories of that project. So from this, we get a feeling of the liveliness, and the colorization is such that the oldest thing that's contributed the most long ago is red, and the other things are black, and then there's a gradual shift from red to black based on how old the contributions are. So some of these things now, if we look at them, we can see there's really some key projects that things like EMF is like this last number. There are 40 downstream direct dependencies on EMF, so it's a key contributor. Also, EMF services has a lot of dependencies, but it's a little disconcerting that almost 300 days ago was the last time they updated their contribution, and it's a little odd that meanwhile in their Git repositories there have been quite recent changes. So they're changing something, but they're not contributing it to the train. Another one that's kind of concerning is UML2. It's got not a huge number of downstream consumers, but a significant number, and it's also been inactive for a long time. Same with Graffiti, has been inactive for a long time. So there's quite a few things that are higher up in the graph that seem to have stagnated and are not keeping up to date to the extent that they should be keeping up to date. So some of the behaviors in this graph is if I select something and double click it, it'll select all of the things that it depends on. And if I keep double clicking, it follows those dependencies recursively. So I can see who all depends, what EMF services all depends on. If I shift double click, then it goes in the opposite directions. I can see all the direct dependencies. And if I keep double clicking, then everything ends up somehow downstream from EMF services. These links themselves, if you have a link between OCL and the platform, well, that's probably not the most interesting one, but like a link from OCL to UML2, if I double click that, it will open in the contributed IUs all of the capabilities that are linked to requirements from the IUs of that dependency. So here we can see that OCL, pivot UML depends on UML's code gen. So all of the dependencies in this graph are trackable. So why is that dependency there and what specifically is dependent on? So yeah, that's the type of information I'm trying to gather. Also to get a proper list, if we look at this list here, that we can see what projects are involved and which Git repos. So for the Eclipse, for example, we can see all the sub-projects and all of the Git repositories and determine their commit dates and stuff. So I can get a good overview of what projects are involved, what those projects are doing, how active their Git repositories are, and so on. So this, what I'm showing you, this will get committed probably later this week, and I'll make sure that the SimRel environments that people set up, there's an OOMP setup for creating the SimRel environment. I'll make sure these tools are automatically installed there, and this agran file will also be committed to Git so that everyone will have this available and can look at the dependencies of their own project. And I'll provide documentation to explain how this stuff works. I think that keeps me still within my time frame and leaves us some time for questions still as well.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for the comprehensive demo and everything. Thanks for the work. Yeah, that's the presentations that we have today. So we have a little bit of time. So if anybody would like to ask any questions about anything that you've heard today, or even other things, you're most welcome. So, anybody got any questions? If not, you're always very welcome to ask us questions later. That's also good, via the mailing list or however, or come along to a meeting. That would be good too.
Hey, Mark,
any
I think Thomas has a question.
Okay. Oh, hi, Thomas.
Hi. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was missing the phantom power. Anyway, about the contributions to SimRail, do we understand why people are not contributing changes they're making to SimRail?
I mean, I think to some extent there are projects that are just highly stable. So UML2, for example, it implements a standard. That standard is not changing, or if it is, nobody's funding the keeping up to date with that standard. So I think it's not always a sign of a problem that projects aren't updating their contributions. It's often a reflection of the fact that they're super stable. Sometimes it's a problem, like one of the problems we ran into SimRail is wanting more, like there were lots of MD5 checksums and we wanted more modern checksums that are considered more secure. And then if they don't contribute new builds, then they don't have new checksums. But yeah, I think a lot of projects are just super stable, and the people that work on them are working on some web version of similar stuff, and so there's just not much demand for changes.
I mean, you particularly mentioned, I think, EMF something or
the EMF services. Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, I'm just asking because you said it's concerning. So do we understand?
Yeah, that one is more of a concern because I know they're not bug free, and yeah, they're not really fixing their bugs, but I guess no one cares enough to contribute fixes, and it'll become more of a concern when they have to migrate to GitHub, and then they're really going to have to do something. And then at that point, I would be concerned that projects that haven't contributed a build in a year are probably going to wait till the last minute for GitHub migration, and then yeah, it's going to be a problem. I need to follow up with some of these teams more directly now that I have all the information to find out what their plans are, what they're up to, why is there no activity when maybe there should be, and yeah, things to that effect.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Ed. Any more questions? Hans, do you have a question?
Yes. Hello.
Go for it.
I have a question regarding the GitHub bots you're looking for, especially in the topic of integrating pull requests, because at the moment you have actually two options for the Eclipse top-level projects. You can either rebase and merge a pull request, or you can squash and merge it. And what's currently bothering me a bit is if I use the rebase and merge version, there is some information lacking, especially the pull request from which this commit is coming from. This is a little bit better, in my opinion, with the squash and merge option, where you get automatically, or at least you get suggested by the GitHub web interface to append the pull request number, so that after you will, if you're, for example, in the Git and looking at the commit, you can see where this commit is coming from or where it was discussed, and you get some context information. And I would really appreciate if we can establish a way to get these information also with the rebase and merge strategy. Of course, this is actually something we have to ask GitHub for, but I've seen at many projects, for example, the OpenJDK project, that they are using bots to integrate their commits. Then they are using a message like /integrate, and then the commit gets integrated. In the web UI, it looks like just a closed and abandoned PR, but in the background, the bot is submitting this or pushing commit to the master branch or whatever branch, and is also integrating some metadata. For example, the URL to the PR from which this commit was manufactured. And I'm also thinking about information, for example, like the reviewers that reviewed that PR, what would I found interesting. And if I remember correctly, in the very end, if I submitted a patch in Gerrit, there was also information like this appended to the commit message. And I would be interested if something like this is planned for the GitHub integration as well. Since it was mentioned that there are some things looked into.
Yes, we have. Go ahead, Alex.
So I have to admit I haven't looked at that part at all.
Okay.
And what Shravan mentioned as something we planned is more about direct user contribution visible things like HTML validation, image optimization, and so on. What you mentioned would be more than welcome, but so far from the Releng side, it's not looked at all.
Okay. Yeah, if I remember correctly, there was some discussion on any mailing list. I'm not sure which one it was.
I think on PDE they were trying something like this. I saw a couple of PRs with these /rebase comments in them, and I thought it was supposed to automatically rebase the PR. I assumed so that you could then do a squash and merge and everything would work in the good way, but I don't know if they got that working or not. But check out the PDE main repo. Some of the recent pull requests, I think they were playing with that.
Did you say something? Jonah, did you want to say something?
I put a comment in the chat. GitHub supports the feature that we don't need to do anything else. If you look at any commit in GitHub itself, if it was part of a PR, the PR is listed there. So I put in an example of a recent commit that didn't have any PR information in the commit message. And you'll see just below the commit message, it will show you which PR number it was in.
Okay. Was this recently updated?
No, this is a GitHub feature that's been there for a few years.
I think that probably works if you use merge commits.
No.
No, even without merge commits? Okay.
Yeah. So I put an example in the comments. You can have a look and see if that satisfies your requirement. If it doesn't, then we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, I just opened it, and to be honest, maybe I'm just looking at the wrong points, but I can see it immediately.
How about I share my screen and I show you what I see, so we can.
Yes, if I recall correctly, Jonah Graham also suggested something similar and mentioned that there are already existing bots for that. Yes. So since other projects are using that as well, we're not the first people.
Yeah, no, I certainly recommend it, but just like I think it's going to be a bunch of effort to do that, and I don't know anyone who has the time at the moment. So, but for this thing, so for example, on this project, Alex committed this via pull request. You know, the commit here does not show anything about which pull request it is. Like, there's no number in the commit message. But if you open the pull request, it'll show you which branch it's on and which PR it came in on, if it's available.
Okay.
And on that one, then you get then you get back to the pull request that it was part of.
Okay.
So even though there's no extra metadata there.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely a way. I mean, and if I'm coming from my IDE, then I can take the commit IDE and commit ID and look in the repo for that, and then click on that. Okay. Do you know if this works with a rebase and merge and a squash and merge as well, or is this?
So as long as the commit message number is part of the PR, I think it works fine. So,
okay.
But I haven't seen it fail. But I don't use the feature that often. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jonah. Thanks, Hans. That's great. I think we're out of time. But thank you for the good Q&A. And if there's any more questions, I think we could do it via the email, I guess. Thank you very much. Thanks all for joining and thanks for your time.